Goedenavond allemaal, welkom. Wat fijn dat jullie er zijn. Welkom in de Bali, mocht je hier vandaag nog niet geweest zijn. En welkom bij Brainwash, mocht dit je eerste sessie zijn. We gaan het vanavond hebben over een democratischer belastingstelsel en de rol van de superrijken. Ja, het is alweer het einde bijna van de dag vandaag bij Brainwash. En zoals jullie weten gaat het thema dit jaar over grenzen. En dat betekent dat we het moeten hebben over landsgrenzen en belastinggrenzen. En dat ga ik gelukkig niet alleen doen. Dat ga ik doen met Fiscalist Reinier Kooiman en met journalist Atossa Araxia Abrahamian. And because Atossa does not speak Dutch, the rest of this session will be held in English. And before we get started, I would like to get your perspective on this subject. So if the following applies to you, you may stand up. Who thinks there should be more taxes? You may stand up. Careful what you wish for. Thank you. You may sit down. And who thinks offshore zones are a problem? Okay, thank you. You may sit down again. Now, who didn't stand up yet may stand up now. Anyone who didn't stand up just yet? You guys are also very welcome. Thank you. My name is Jasmine. I'm a journalist and a columnist at Vrij Nederland, and I'm also a presenter. And once again, very welcome to you all. What we're going to do today is we're going to start with Atossa. I'm going to give her the floor for around 10 or 15 minutes, and she will tell you all about her views on this subject and her ideas on how money draws maps and the emergence of extraterritorial zones reserved for the ultra-wealthy. And after that, I will talk with Reinier Kooiman, a fiscalist, and Atossa herself. So, I think we can just get started. She's based in New York. She is the author of books like The Hidden Globe and The Cosmopolits. Her work focuses on immigration, globalization, and the cracks in the nation-state system. She was an editor at The Nation and at Al Jazeera America, and her writing has appeared in, among others, the New York Times. I would like to give the floor to Atossa Araxia Abrahamian. Very welcome. Give her applause.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for Brainwash for the invitation. I'm really happy to be speaking with you. Unfortunately, I was just in the Netherlands, but I missed the festival, so we'll have to do it by Zoom. I hope I can hold your attention on yet another screen for just a short time. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the offshore world. But before I start, I wanted to bring up a few of the challenges of talking about offshore before I launch into a way that I hope is more interesting to talk about offshore. And that's that, you know, when you read like the Panama Papers or the Paradise Papers, or you read all of these reports about inequality and tax avoidance and like accounting, that stuff is really quite boring a lot of the time. And I think that has stood in the way of activists. It has stood in the way of political reforms, and it has stood in the way of a sort of popular understanding, not just on a basic level of like, oh, the rich get away with things and the poor don't, or normal people even don't, but of sort of grasping like the worldview that goes into offshore and like the logic that animates it. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is actually one man who I think was probably the most offshore man who ever lived. The spoiler is that he's no longer living. And I think that looking at the offshore world, not through accounting records or leaks or even maps, but through the life and times of this person that I'm going to introduce you to, I think will help humanize the offshore world and help us understand how to navigate it, not as a corporation or like, you know, somebody who's pushing paper, but as an individual and the ways that these actions of this individual can help us understand the way that the world works better. So this man, his name is Samuele Landi. He died about a year and a half ago. about a year and a half ago. And he was an Italian computer programmer and telecoms entrepreneur. And I found out about Samuele Landi through some forums that I've been frequenting for a long time in my work as a journalist, writing about offshore. But specifically in this case, I was on a forum for seasteading. I don't know how many of you have heard of seasteading, but seasteading is a movement that believes that there's no more land to colonize, right? And so we must turn to the high seas, to the open ocean, to international waters to create new countries on floating platforms. There's a lot going on. It's a bit crazy. But there are people out there who believe this is the future. And I think that it's quite a brilliant thought experiment, right? That challenges the way that we think about the nation state, globalization, starting new countries. The proponents of seasteading tend to be libertarians who don't like the rules of the countries that they are in. But for the most part, the people who talk a lot about seasteading, and Peter Thiel was one of the early funders of the seasteading movement, which was a nonprofit. Another person who's quite involved was the grandson of Milton Friedman, Patry Friedman. So you can see the sort of political leanings of this milieu. Where was I going? Most seasteaders, they just talk about it. Maybe they donate some money to this nonprofit and they go to some conventions. They have a floating Burning Man festival. It's called Ephemeral. It's like Burning Man, but on houseboats. You guys should try it. Amsterdam has lots of those. So it's a lot of talk and very little action. What distinguished Samuele Landi from these guys is that he actually did it. So in December of 2023, Samuele Landi left land forever. He moved onto a barge in the Gulf between Dubai and Iran, in the Persian Gulf. He moved there with some cats that he found under his car in a box. I think there were one mom cat and 4 kittens, some crew members that he hired through an agency. Eventually, he got some chickens, and he basically lived in prefab, like a shipping container that he equipped quite elaborately with air conditioning and desalination and water filters and everything that he needed. And he lived on this barge for more than a year, more or less autonomously. He relied on deliveries that were coming from Dubai for food, for meat. He had a big freezer full of frozen meat. He fished. He had, I think, some tomatoes or some plants that he was growing, but he was really living the seasteader's dream. Again, the spoiler is that his dream only lasted so long because eventually the barge, which was kind of shitty, and he bought it secondhand, succumbed to a big wave. This was a very unusual weather event. It wasn't supposed to happen, of course, but so there was a big wave that hit the barge and it killed him. The cats, unfortunately, and some of his crew members also died in this accident. But, he was able to keep it going for quite a while. The interesting thing about Samuele Landi is that this lifestyle was really just the last of many, many, many offshore schemes that he had cycled through since he was quite a young man. So now I'll now start from the very beginning of Samuele Landi's life to give you a sense of how he was able to exploit the offshore world in a way that is kind of sinister and like maybe a little evil, but also very brilliant, because he really grasped all of what the offshore world had to offer. He didn't do it from the position in a boardroom necessarily. He was pretty scrappy. He started doing this when he was quite young. And I think that better than anything, he really illustrates the way that this world works. So Landi was born in Italy. He's from a place called Arezzo, which is in Tuscany. It is the rare Tuscan place that's not very beautiful. I went there. I was a little disappointed. But it's still Tuscany. It's still pretty nice. And Samuele Landi, as a young man, was very interested in extreme sports. He jumped out of planes. He did the Paris-Dakar race a bunch of times. He was quite a well-known motorcycle racer. And this was like what his passion was. He was also quite smart. like he was very gifted when it came to tinkering with computers and mathematics and everything technical. And he went into business with some of his relatives when he was in his 20s. He thought of himself as sort of a Steve Jobs figure, right? He started he started tinkering with computers and started actually a telecoms company from he says his garage, but I was not able to verify that. So Landy's first company employed a kind of hacker mentality to the very quickly deregulating telecoms world. Samuele Landi, when the Italian government was kind of privatizing a lot of telecoms, he bought phone numbers from the government, easy to remember, like 222 or 777, and sort of routed them through his telecommunications system, and sold them to things like horoscope tellers and cinema schedules, like all the things that you would call up for a service on the phone before the internet. He had a line that, he charged extra fees for you to call, but you would basically call and get information. There was also a lot of phone sex, I think, erotic phone calls through this service. And it was very successful. It was called Plug It. They did get fined for misleading consumers about how much it would cost to call and talk to some nice ladies on the phone. But, that was a low-level offense, and they were fined, and they kept going. Plug It then turned into a much bigger telecoms operator called Eutelia. They provided ISP. At one point, it was the third biggest telecommunications provider in Italy. And he started this with a lot of his relatives and brothers and cousins, and a prosecutor that I later talked to sort of said it implied very heavily that it was very mob-like the way that this company was run. But again, it was a family business. It was in the sort of middling town, and what came to distinguish it later is that a lot of its profits were routed through these very obscure tax shelters. So he, again, without the help of like a McKinsey consultant or a white shoe law firm trying to find these hacks, Samuele Landi and 5 of his relatives were using a series of falsified or inaccurate invoices to siphon money from Eutelia into tax shelters all around the world, including a shell company on the Polynesian island of Niue, a UBS account in Monaco, and a Romanian LLC in Bucharest, fully owned by a Swiss firm controlled by a Swiss arms dealer. So he really had connections all around the world. I took some of these tax hacks to an expert, Vanessa Ogle, who teaches at Yale, and she was like, I haven't even heard of the specific island. So really finding the most obscure places. And the corporate vehicles they used to route the money through had almost no employees, produced no tangible work, and existed, according to the prosecutors that later prosecuted Eutelia, primarily for the purpose of draining the company's coffers for the family members. So you've probably heard of these kinds of things happening. Sometimes they happen through the Netherlands. And they're not uncommon, especially today. But this was, again, a family business run by this, a couple of guys who were just very entrepreneurial and really saw in sort of the earlier version of what the globalization we have today, the ways around the nation states' rules and regulations. So Eutelia went bankrupt. This is how a lot of these tactics became public knowledge. It's in a lot of court records. But Samuele Landi, I guess, had some pretty strong political views of his own, and he was quite angry, I think, at the workers of Eutelia, who, once they caught wind of what was going on, were very angry and had a sit-in at their offices in Rome. And there was a very famous moment for Landi where the workers did a sit-in. He was fighting off all of these charges of tax avoidance and fraud. And he actually got 15 of his friends or entourage and went in and tried to break up the sit-in. And in a way that was very reminiscent of almost like fascist style thuggery. So again, I think that Landi's actions are a little bit more tell us a little bit more than his political views, which were a little bit nuts at the end. He was very into 5G conspiracies and anti-COVID. So I don't know how coherent all this was, but there was definitely a strong sort of pro-market, anti-labor aspect to his personality and to his work. So we're around 2008, 2009. Eutelia is in trouble. Landi is increasingly being perceived as a thug. And the money is hiding in all of these places. I think they're trying to get it out, but the law is coming after Landi and Eutelia and his brothers. So what does Samuele Landi do? He gets on a plane and he goes to Dubai. At the time, Dubai had no taxes on foreign citizens' income. It had no extradition agreement with Italy. It does now, but at the time it did not. And it was developing a reputation as a place where criminals and their money could find a safe haven. So he eventually brought his family, his wife and his children, and he blended in. I mean, this was a perfect place for somebody like that to live. He picked up where he left off professionally. He was no longer running Eutelia, but he started a new company called Cryptotel, which was an encrypted mobile phone software company. And he incorporated Cryptotel in Internet City. So you guys might know this, but Dubai is full of these special economic zones, which have their own regulations, all very, very pro-business, and designed to make it easy for foreigners to open companies. And so they're these little islands of capitalism in already a very capitalist sea. So he found Internet City. It had, I guess, good infrastructure for internet companies, registered his company, and off he went, rather. Cryptotel, he's hired some of his old friends from back home, one of his skydiving buddies, according to LinkedIn. And he was looking for clients who would pay him in cryptocurrencies. And then he would convert the digital currencies into, local currency or dollars whenever he needed cash. So again, he was finding a way, not just around the criminal charges against him in Italy, but also around any potential sanctions on his accounts by using crypto. Back when crypto was not what it is today. This was 15 years ago, right? So he had access to funds. His family was there, and he had a pretty nice lifestyle. His villa reportedly cost $10,000 a month. He had a driver, a car. The driver was didn't want to talk to me, but I know he exists. And private school for his kids and trips abroad. And all the while, people back home were very unhappy with Samuele Landi because he'd escaped, but the rest of the Eutelia crew were home and facing the law. And it was lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. And in 2015, the criminal court in Arezzo sentenced the cousin, the uncle, the brother to years in prison. Their appeals failed. The uncle died. So there was some resentment, right, against him for escaping in such a way. While he was away, Samuele Landi was sentenced to a total of 14 years in prison in absentia, but he never served these because he didn't go to Italy. He avoided countries where he could be extradited. And, according to a friend of his, he felt safe in Dubai. And I also asked this friend, do you think Samuele Landi missed Italy on some level? Because he was always online, he was always commenting on local news stories and sort of defending himself. And he became quite obsessed with the legal proceedings against him to the point where he bought a local blog and posted things on it. And his friend, who was the editor of the blog, said he would only come back to Italy for his mother. So Samuele Landi is living large in Dubai. But again, in Italy, the law is sort of creeping up on him, right? And Italy and UAE are talking about extradition treaties. There's maybe a little bit more control over cryptocurrencies. All of his activities are becoming increasingly caught up in regulation that he thought that he was going to be able to escape. So Landi turns to a very time-tested strategy of offshoring not just one's money or one's life, but one's self. And that is by procuring diplomatic immunity. So this has been going on for a long time. you read old novels about honorary consuls, and you can find old news stories about people buying diplomatic passports and doing dodgy things. This still happens today, right? The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists has a whole database of people, of honorary consuls or sort of honorary diplomats who kind of ingratiate themselves to a country to get the diplomatic credential. And the operative thing here is when you have diplomatic immunity, you can't be prosecuted locally. There's a diplomatic process where you have to be recalled to your country, which is not always your actual country. And so it's kind of a shield. It's like a protective cloak that you benefit from as a diplomat. Samuele Landi's choice of country, or rather the country that chose him, was Liberia, a country that he had no family ties to, no marriage ties to, but that Eutelia had opened a sort of subsidiary in. Again, very little business activity happened, but there was a company there. So people think that that's when he became friendly with some Liberians who were in power. One of the people that he was friends with in Liberia was the ex-wife of Charles Taylor, who was, Charles Taylor is very famous for the war crimes that he was accused and convicted of. So this is the ex-wife, and she was a lawyer, and I don't think had anything to do with the war crimes aspect of that. But in any case, by 2022, when the Liberian president, George Weah, landed in Dubai for a diplomatic visit, Landi was fully in the sort of fold of the Liberian diplomatic corps. So when Weah landed at the airport, Landi was there to greet him. There's a video of him. Landi's very tall and very white, his shiny bald head on the terminal that you can see in the videos. And he was there in his capacity as Liberia's honorary consul general to Dubai. So this was yet another loophole, right? He was appointed by Liberia to be their kind of business guy on the ground, and that also afforded him not only diplomatic immunity, but also just contacts, and he was able to navigate the world not as a fraudster and a businessman, but as an honorary consul, which sounds very honorable. A lot of the time, these honorary consuls, these sort of paper diplomats, don't really serve the country that they're the consul for, right? They'll wave a flag at a ceremony once a year, and I've met a few of these guys, and they're not, they don't talk about the country as we. Samuele Landi really embraced his role as a Liberian consul. It's very surprising, actually, and I think that it made his personality a little bit more complex because he threw parties, he threw Independence Day parties in his villa. He solicited funds from Arab donors in the Gulf for a hospital in Liberia. And in a strange twist, Samuele Landi even used his consular powers to help repatriate dozens of Liberian domestic workers who had been trafficked into Oman. So these were ladies who were promised jobs in Oman, landed there, and ended up essentially working in modern-day slavery, having their passports taken away and being subjected to horrible conditions in the homes of wealthy Omanis. So Landi found out about this through a WhatsApp chat. His number was listed as in the diplomatic registry for Liberia. And so some women started to contact him, and he really threw himself into the cause. So despite some of his shadier activities, he helped many women get out of Oman and go back to Liberia and get out of these terrible situations. And there's evidence that he paid for some of their trips himself. He really went out there. So how does this square with his otherwise sort of libertarian leanings? I think that the guy really, truly, and genuinely wanted freedom for himself, of course, but even also for other people. So I think that we should be fair to Landi and sort of acknowledge that. All the while he was working in Dubai, he had a carbon capture startup that also employed this sort of logic of offshore. that the company would buy up forest lands in Liberia and other states to offset pollution in other parts of the world. So companies could sort of buy these credits. Again, does not solve the problem of climate change or of carbon, but it does allow you to sort of shift the responsibility elsewhere, which is a hallmark of the offshore world.
To round up, so we also have time for the conversation.
Yes. I'm wrapping up in 3 minutes. So this was the point at which Landy, he'd done everything he could on land, and the extradition treaty with Italy was sort of coming to exist. And I think that he felt very much like people were after him. And so that was the point at which he moved to this barge offshore. He didn't tell anyone about it. He just moved there, and it shocked his friends, his family. And that's where he lived for a whole year up until his demise. And during this time, he kept on working for CryptoTel. He was online all the time thanks to Starlink satellite connection. And he had quite a comfortable existence there until, of course, the wave hit and, things all came to an end. But I think it is a fitting end to a life that was offshore in every respect you could possibly imagine.
Thank you so much. Atossa. And now I would like to introduce our second guest for tonight. He's a researcher, a lecturer at Leiden University, and he's affiliated with the law firm Stibbe. And he wrote the book, The Strongest Soldiers. Here is Reinier Kooiman. Welcome.
Thank you.
Have a seat. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm still in shock because of the question you asked the audience.
Why?
Yeah, I couldn't see everything, but from behind the curtain. But I thought that maybe everyone was raising up for more taxes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Why does that scare you?
Because there's a big difference between the United States and Europe, and the difference is that we have lower income inequality comparing to the US. But our wealth inequality is almost the same as the United States, even here in the Netherlands. And there's one reason, that's that we have more taxes than the US. So more taxes means more redistribution from the poor to the wealth.
Yeah.
And you are all in favor of that, and yeah.
But why does that scare you? Why does it shock you?
Because I had expected most of the people want redistribution from the rich to the poor and not in the opposite way. So you are all in favor of taxing more, and taxing more means in reality taxing more of the poor and less of the rich.
Okay, so let's do it again. Who thinks we should tax the poor?
So that's interesting. So, there are two conflicting statements, and we have to solve them.
Yeah. Okay, how did you listen to Atossa?
Yeah, it's very, very interesting because sometimes I have to explain my students about the offshore world, or more general, the international tax system. And it's very difficult because it's quite abstract and very complicated rules and legal fictions. And Atossa's view is more interesting because it's a human perspective on offshore. So it's about real persons who are traveling all over the world and using the offshore regimes. So that's quite interesting because otherwise it's only very specific rules, and you can't get good grip on it.
Do you agree with Atossa that capital will always find a loophole?
No, I don't think so. Of course, it's difficult to say it for the future, but if you look to the past, to history, historically the offshore regimes and the free ports and tax havens are a quite new phenomenon. So before the 20th century, we haven't something like that. Even in the opposite way. So I've studied medieval history, and there were also the free ports and the tax havens, but it was just for the poor people.
So why? Because in your book you focus on medieval Italy.
Yes.
What do they do with taxes that actually makes it work?
They had a very good system, I would say, to tax the rich. So the world was more opposite. So the rich people were living in the city, and they had to pay taxes according to each wealth. And the poor people were living outside, and they had also to pay taxes. But there were some offshore places, but it was at the frontier, for example, between Siena and Florence. And they have there was some tax exemption because it was so dangerous, and they want to stimulate people to live there. So it was the poor people were moving between places, and the rich people were staying in the city. And they could tax them by having a register of wealth. And I think also because it was a quite small society, so it was more difficult to say, I want to pay my fair share, I want to pay a contribution to the state, because you was well known in the city. But I think the most important difference between that system and today is that they had as principle that taxation was according to wealth instead of according to income. So wealth, capital, was the basic principle of their taxation system, because they say that is the best way to tax
Yeah.
according to my book is called The Strongest Shoulder, so according to your ability to pay.
Yeah.
And we have changed it during the 18th and 19th century in our thinking, and since the 20th century in our laws, to say no, we want to tax capital, we want to tax income because it's better. But it has made a huge shift, because we have all income. I think everyone here has some sort of income, but 50% of the society has no capital. But they have still to pay taxes according to their income, and that's according to their capital. So that shift made that our tax systems are highly digressive. So therefore, my introduction, I was saying there is a redistribution from the poor to the rich.
Yeah.
And it's not only because of the offshore zones or tax havens. Even if we had abolished them all, then still there would
be a problem. Because Atossa, so I see you nodding. How big is the problem?
Oh, trillions and trillions of dollars. The issue is no one can really say exactly how big it is, because a lot of this wealth is hidden.
Yeah.
Right. But just to go back domestically, right? It's almost like there's two overlapping problems. There's the problem globally, and then that is built by the problem nationally. Individual countries are unable, unwilling, don't want to fix the regressive systems they have at home. They don't want to close the loopholes that exist between states. And so you end up with this trillions and trillions of dollar problem internationally.
Why do you think they don't want to fix that?
I think that there's a lot of lobbying from very wealthy people. I also think it's complicated, and people maybe don't, again, it's hard to grasp. It's hard to grasp as like one person. It's really big and thorny, and I think, well, maybe this is my optimistic view, is that if people understood it better, they would fix it. But maybe that's too optimistic.
Okay. Who is...
To add to that, I think there are also some, and sometimes good historical reasons. So if you look, for example, to the Channel Islands between France and England, so Jersey and Guernsey, they are infamous tax havens. And England knows that. But there was one big problem during the World War II. They couldn't defend the island, so they had a German occupation for 6 years. And after that, there was the problem that there were tax havens, so there was less money in the English treasury. But it was difficult for them to change them, because the people of Guernsey and Jersey were saying, you couldn't defend us in the war, so why we have to change our system? So after that, they've introduced, that's quite funny, a corporation tax with a rate of 0. That's quite interesting. So we have a new tax. So what do we have to pay? So the regular rate is 0%. That's also because of rules like in the Netherlands, because we are saying you are a real tax haven if you have no tax at all. Yeah. And if you have tax but a lower rate, like 0%, you are not a real tax haven. So some anti-avoidance rules are not applicable, but that's quite difficult in the international tax system. But there is some reason, because they're a very small island, so they have no possibility to survive in global economy, and this is their only thing. And you also see it in the Caribbean, like the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. There's no alternative for them. So yes, I think we can shut them all down, like the bank secrecy in Switzerland. I think it was abolished in maybe a period of 5 years because of international pressure. So that it's possible if there is a political will to do that. But in practice, there are also a lot of other interests that play a role. And it's mostly former colonies, so there's also some problem with that, you think.
What is the link between that, a former colony and...
I think it's difficult to explain to people that you have first colonized them for centuries, and after then they have some model to earn money for themselves, and then you say, oh, you are doing the bad way, and we shut it down, and then you have nothing at all. So,
what is the idea behind our current tax system? How did it come to be as it is now?
I think our current system is based on capitalistic values. So the main objective is to raise money and to do it in such a way that it's not affected the economy and the capitalist economy. And that's also the reason that we tax only income and not capital itself, because the thinking from the 18th century, like famous economists as Adam Smith were saying, if you tax capital itself, that is the source of your welfare. So you have to exempt capital and only tax income or mostly consumption. But we all know that consumption taxes like the VAT are paid by the poor mostly. Income tax is paid by us all, but mostly by the poor and less by the rich. And capital, we want to exempt it because of that idea.
Yeah.
And that's quite different from the medieval period, where they say capital is the only just way to tax.
Yeah. Atossa, when does tax evasion become corruption?
Well, after the Panama Papers and all those leaks come out, the most common response you hear is, oh, but it's legal, right? And so what is the line between corruption and legality and morality? I think that there's an argument to say it's all quite corrupt if it goes against the spirit of the law, if not the letter of the law. But the thing is, the letter of the law is what people get held to. So I think there's a bigger corruption in a sort of a moral sense that's going on that you really can't pin down in quite the same way as, like you misreported your taxable income.
Yeah. You agree?
Yeah, I would say that it has changed. I'm working at a law firm also, so I see that all that kind of structures and using of tax havens. And I think for 15 years ago, they were using them to avoid taxes, and now they're using them to prevent paying twice. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of anti-avoidance rules all over the world. So if you're speaking for multinational companies, they were paying not so much, 0 till I think 10% of their profits, and now they are paying much more than 20 years ago, and they're still using all these tax havens, but it's especially with the purpose to avoid paying on the same profits in several countries. So I think a part of the problem is solved by a lot of rules from the international community, from the EU. But I think there is still a big problem for individuals because they can move to offshore zones, and so I think that's the new problem. We have do good steps to tax the multinational companies.
Yeah,
and there is a sort of sense within the boardrooms that they have to pay enough taxes because otherwise there is a lot of attention, media coverage, and so on.
You think that's the intention? It's more the attention they get from media and the public, not necessarily the moral idea behind it?
Yes. It's not immoral, it's amoral. So moral has no role in it because it's just about the rules. And of course, if the judge is saying you have to interpret the Dutch tax law according to its spirit, then they will apply that in practice. So easy, but it's not because they are very moral. No.
Yeah.
But I don't think that you are always moral in your work, so that's not... Yeah. I think if you have a very technical task, then it's easy to limit yourselves to perform the technical task in a good way and not thinking about morality or ethics or something like that.
Yeah. Atossa, would you like to respond?
If I may, there are tax haven. We've been talking about tax in a very fiscal, sort of specifically to the fiscal sphere, but I think we need to also conceptualize of offshore in a way that is just a broader way of avoiding regulation. Mm-hmm. In the case of environmental responsibilities, you have places that will let you do more. Pollute more, for example, than in the EU. There are places where it's much harder for a company to be sued, right? So you have other kinds of havens that are all part of this ecosystem, I think, of evading responsibility. And so while it's true that European companies, at least, maybe it's going the other way in where I am in the US, there is a sense of like, we don't want to be shamed for avoiding, our tax obligations. There's still a whole array of other types of things that companies will try to avoid if they're held to higher standards.
Yeah. So to both of you, who do you think is responsible to chase individuals or corporations down if they try, to go to these offshore zones or free ports?
Yeah, I would say the government, because I really believe that you can make an end to these loopholes and by making regulations, and you don't have to.
Can you, just one government by themselves, it doesn't take international.
Yeah, of course you need some international cooperation. But if you look into Europe, to the EU, if the EU decides tomorrow we want to have a billionaire's tax,
yeah,
and you have to pay it, and the consequence for not paying is that you can't enter Europe anymore, then I think most billionaires will pay it, because it's not necessary for them to live in France or the Netherlands, but it's necessary for them to be in Monaco with their friends, or Ibiza or other places. So if they can't be in Europe, never if they don't pay, that would be has a huge impact. And they are also looking to their peers because they want to be richer than their friends. So if they all have to pay more taxes, then it would not necessarily be a big problem, I think.
Yeah. Atossa, I saw you mouthing something. However, we didn't hear you.
I said maybe you have to make it so inconvenient that they have to go live on a barge like Samuele Landi, right? In a way, he was sort of doing it to himself.
Yeah. So So that's what you both think is the solution to reinforce the checking of power.
I think there's a little bit more to it, just in a global sense. You mentioned that there was a problem of incentive, and that countries don't always have a lot going for them. They need to do these tricky things to lower taxes to bring in revenue. That's because it's very competitive, right? It's one country against another. We have this like pretty cutthroat capitalist system that incentivizes this race to the bottom. And so I don't have the solution to this, don't get me wrong, but I think there need to be better incentives to do the right thing and have more of a race to the top. And I definitely think that we need cooperation between governments, whether it's EU or the UN was supposed to have a working group on taxation. I don't think that's really going to go anywhere with Mr. Trump and his allies in power. Mm-hmm. But I think that international bodies have a really big role to play. The problem is they're not very empowered to have anything binding on right now.
Yeah. So if both of you could implement one rule to have a more democratic taxation, what would it be?
I think quite easy, that you can show people what they are paying every year. So you don't get only, in the Netherlands, it's a blue envelope with some message from the tax authorities. You have to file your tax return. But they're also telling you over the last year, so 2024, you have paid this amount VAT, this amount local taxes, income tax, car taxes, everything. Because if you are more aware of this and see what we are actually paying, then we understand that poor people are paying relatively more taxes than rich people. And I think that's the beginning to, it begins there to have a discussion and to change the system. But we have a system that's based on secrecy. This is one of the economic principles, is that you don't know what you are paying. So VAT is very popular on our economists, but also the income tax, because we have first wage taxes, and then you have on your bank account only the net amount of your salary. So you are thinking, that's my salary. So you can't understand what you are paying every year, and that's, I think, a big problem, because therefore we don't see that we are taxing too much from the rich, from the poor people, and not enough
less from the rich. Ingrid Robijns, she says says there should be a maximum on wealth. How do you feel about that? She says there should be a cap on wealth people could have.
Yeah, I think that's quite problematic because there is some economic problem, and that's that if you're saying, for example, 50 million that's it, that's the max, and above them we go expropriate you, then the state will receive a lot of shares in companies. And the question is whether they are capable to manage that companies in a good manner. And we have not very good experience with that, with the government owning a lot of assets. Or you can, of course, look to communist societies, but also Europe after, in the post-war decades, there were a lot of problems with this nationalization of companies. So I think that could be an economic problem, but there's also another problem, and that's that we are only looking to the very rich. But even if we expropriate all the billionaires in the world, I think it's 17 trillion, and you think, oh, that's a lot of money, but it's only 10% of the total size of the world's economy on a yearly basis. So if you want to do
10%
that...
10% is a lot, though.
Yeah, but that means that we have 1 year, no income tax, yay! But the other year, then it's again income tax, 30%, that's all. So if you only look to the very small group of billionaires, they are not rich enough to solve all problems with poor people who have no pension and no housing. So it is too... They are always looking to the very rich, and that's, of course, that's important. But we are have to looking to the elite in the broadest sense, and also the upper middle class, because they have all capital and their own house and pensions and something like that. And if we want to change the problem that 50% of the people in Netherlands, but also worldwide, has no property at all, has no capital at all, we have to tax not only the very rich, but also the other, the 1% rich, but also the medium rich. Yes, of course, because otherwise you can't have a shift economically. It's impossible. Yeah. It's too. It's not enough money.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to have some questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and a microphone will come your way. Anyone have a question for either Atossa or Reinier? Nou, niet allemaal tegelijk, jongens. Nee, ja. I see 2 hands over there. Yeah. Oh. Wait 1 second, so Atossa can also hear you. Yes, hello. Could you say your name?
Hi, Alain Kummer. I wondered the discussion about taxing the really rich people. You know, there's a discussion in France going on at the moment. And always the argument is that you don't do it because they will leave the country. And they said, but you should do it European-wide. Or would you say you could start as a country within Europe? It's always a discussion. We wait till Europe does it. We wait till the world does it. Or should we take action as a nation?
Okay, thank you. So to both of you, this is thank you for your question, because hasn't there been research done that shows that people or corporations that leave because of high tax rates, they usually leave, but they leave to places with even higher tax rates? Is that true?
For corporations, I think they will leave, of course, but that it's difficult to have a higher tax rate for corporations than your neighbor countries. So you have always do it. You need to do it on an EU level or worldwide level. Like the OECD is trying now with a sort of minimum tax for corporations of 50%, but the US is not joining it, so it's still a problem. But you need it on an international level. But I think if you are taxing individuals, then I think there is a possibility to do it on the level of your own country, because you have exit taxations. That you say, okay, if you don't want to pay it and you will leave, you have to, I don't know, 30 or 40% of your wealth you have to pay at once, and then there's nobody who wants to leave. So you can quite easy solve that problem, but I think it's better on an EU level, because otherwise there are still some distortions between countries. But I don't think we have to wait for that, because if there's one good example in France for now, or even in Belgium, there is some discussion last week on a wealth tax for the very rich. Then other countries can follow. And then we can also see that the main argument of the right-wing politicians, they are saying if we do that, then we are the welfare of us all is decreasing, because we need the very rich, because they are making us also better. Because they are smarter than we, and that kind of things.
That's not true.
I don't think so. There's no research that's showing that. But if you have an example for one country, and then you can say, no, we are still rich after 20 years of billionaires tax, then you have a better proof for that. So.
Okay, thank you. Atossa, would you like to respond to this question as well?
I'll take the next question.
Okay, sure. Another question. I saw another hand. Oh. Sorry, wait till the microphone is at your...
Thank you. You asked Reinier the solution, but I think Atossa didn't answer yet on that question. Is that true?
That's true.
It is true. So you need a lot of things, not to oversimplify, a lot of things need to happen for there to be a solution. But I think what we've gotten at here is that it has to be really costly and inconvenient and uncomfortable to just go somewhere else, right? If individual governments want to have any kind of power over the movement of money, it's got to be a huge pain in the ass to put it somewhere else. For that, what do you need? You need an enforcement arm. You need to be aggressive, but you also need cooperation from other places where the money will just go if you don't stop it. So I think that's part of the solution. My other answer is a little bit more abstract, but I think it is part of this making it inconvenient. And currently, this idea of a legal fiction, right? That a company is somewhere, but it's not actually there, but on paper it's there. Or that a company has, this many employees in this place, but they're not actually producing anything. All of these sort of fictional, ephemeral aspects to corporate life, I think need to be made a bit more real, because that will just make it harder to get up and leave. Second thing's costly.
We're out of time. How short is your question? Pretty short. Okay.
What makes me wonder is every 4 years we are changing politics, and every 4 years we are also changing the long-term tax systems in the different countries. Yeah. So how will we ever create an environment where we have...
Yeah, thank you. How can you make long-term policy if every year the tax system could change? Atossa? No, you can't.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it depends for what you're voting over in 2 weeks' time. So
give them some advice.
No, I will never do that. But I think the main political problem is that taxation is not a main issue. It's always about government expenses, because it's more interesting for a politician to say, I want to have more expenses on healthcare or education or something like that. But it is not so nice to talk about taxation. Yeah. So it's not a main topic. But if you can make it a main topic for politics, then it's more easy to have a plan for not 4 years, but maybe 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, okay. I want to thank both of you for being here online and physically. Atossa Araxia and Reinier Kooiman. Give them a round of applause. En mocht je dan nog even willen dat je avond nog wat langer duurt, dan begint over 10 minuten de grote verkiezingsshow in Paradiso. En om 8 uur is de borrel. Mijn naam was en is nog steeds Jasmin. Graag tot de volgende keer.